Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Accelerate Compliance with Comprehensive Identity Governance. I'm Shay Mann, and I will be your moderator. Today's webinar is in listen-only mode. If you have any questions throughout the event, go ahead and submit those in the Q&A panel, and we'll answer those during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. This session will be recorded, and we will email you a link to the recorded version tomorrow. Joining us today is SailPoint Senior Vice President of Security IQ, Paul Truelove, and Senior Product Marketing Manager of Security IQ, Luis Romero. We've got a lot to cover today, so let's jump in and get started. Paul, I will pass it over to you to get us started.
Thanks, Shay. I'm excited to be here today talking about how we can accelerate compliance and security initiatives with identity governance. For most enterprises, regulatory compliance isn't a new topic. However, it's becoming a much more pressing topic as the challenges associated with maintaining compliance, as well as the growing web of regulations, really increase to a point where the penalty for not complying and not doing a good job securing your access really has escalated to a point where we have to engage. One of the key challenges impacting the ability to secure sensitive information in the enterprise and fundamentally address the regulatory compliance requirements that we're seeing put forth today is knowing what data needs to be secured in the first place. And this quickly flows downhill into much, much more complex challenges that can leave an organization significantly exposed, which we will discuss more over the next few slides. It also highlights a really interesting stat from a recent SailPoint survey on this topic. We actually asked organizations, do you expect to be breached or not? And 3 of 5 said yes. My guess is the other 2 respondents, 2 of 5 respondents didn't actually understand the question, because at this point in time, I think most organizations have ultimately determined, that they have already been breached or will likely be breached in the future. And so in reality, I think most of us are actually better off preparing for the worst, even if it never happens. And the reason we want to plan for the worst is, at the end of the day, the risk of not being prepared actually costs too much. I'm sure everybody on the call today has seen, this list or something very similar. Because, when the data you've been entrusted as an organization to protect is fundamentally breached, the implications for your business are generally measured in millions of dollars lost. And with all of the new regulations like GDPR, at least in the EMEA side, PDPA in the Philippines, but all of the countries are starting to be, take a significant point of view on the exposure of at least personally identifiable information, let alone, corporate financial information, credit card information that we've, historically kind of been dealing with. But as all of these regulations continue to come online or escalate in their importance, the direct financial impact will likely grow in the next several years. But it's more than just the direct financial impact. The reality is the damage to your organization's image, the loss of trust by your customers, can actually magnify the long-term impact of a breach by 10x or more. So we like to think of, compliance, the security and compliance reality is a multi-layered, challenge. You've got a lot sitting on top of your compliance, almost acting like a pendulum swinging back and forth. And all of these issues fundamentally weigh very heavily on the ability to address a growing number of compliance concerns. And so if we really step back and we look at, the ability to effectively comply with security mandates, regardless of whether they're imposed by internal or external forces, and the regulation environment, tends to be the external force that we see, but it all directly relates to how well you understand and manage the issues on this slide. And before we jump into too much detail on these, let's go to the next slide and we'll kind of pick these off one by one. So the first challenge, sensitive data is on the move. The reality is when we really think about how an organization utilizes information, it's pretty easy to see that data is moving within the enterprise from where it used to be stored, generally in customer databases, HR systems, your financial systems, and those tended to be applications or databases or a combination of the two that your organization had pretty good controls over. But the reality today is information is very quickly and aggressively migrating from those types of systems, out to the organization or to the enterprise itself, where your end users are copying that information, they're downloading it, they're extracting it in some way, and they're creating files. Maybe they take something from the mainframe and they export it in a way that they can, look at it in Excel. And then they run some analysis in Excel, and all of a sudden, they say, hey, it'd be great if I had a couple of charts on that I can include in a PowerPoint. And the next thing you know, I want to lock that PowerPoint down, so I now create a PDF. All three of those files, have now been extracted from the system, where you have an understanding of what's in it and distributed all over the organization, because we're asking our end users to collaborate on a day-to-day basis. And what this has actually resulted in is a significant portion of the total amount of data that you need to protect being stored in files. And those files then have moved outside of your structured or your protected systems into file storage systems, where you probably don't have the same level of controls from an access management perspective, from an identity governance perspective, from a security operations perspective, really keeping a close eye on what's happening in those areas. However, once you start to think about where all of the sensitive data is gone, one of the challenges is you have to begin looking at where the data actually resides. And I would guess that many organizations have a good idea where your sensitive data resides, because you can go ask a business owner, you can go ask an IT owner. Most organizations that use something like SAP have both a business and IT owner that fundamentally take responsibility for the day-to-day use of that application, and what kind of information is being stored in it and who has access to it. When you start moving outside of that structured world, a lot of those questions have to be asked again and have to be asked of a much, much wider group of people. And so we kind of start down this path where, first I have to understand where files are being stored. Is it a Windows file share? Is it a SharePoint collaboration portal? Or, has the organization embraced something out in the cloud, like a OneDrive or a Box? Once I've at least determined where, I'm most likely to be storing files, then I have to go through a process of understanding which files contain sensitive data. Because if we thought it was hard to manage applications and databases, it's really hard to manage access to files. And so I want to focus things a little bit more on areas of sensitivity or risk, because I can't and I won't be able to manage everything, at the same level of granularity. And once I understand which files contain sensitive data, then I have to start looking at how access is granted to the data and who has access to it. And then, fundamentally, I want to come back around, with the final piece of information and really understand how the data is being used. That last piece is something that actually a lot of people overlook, because they don't really worry a lot about the actual usage patterns. And usage patterns tell you two things when it comes to data. Number one, has it become stale, and should it be, maybe moved to an offline repository or deleted completely? But it also gives you insight into the typical behaviors you should be seeing, and it will help proactively identify, which we'll come back to in a minute, when a potential breach may be occurring. And so once you actually have answers to these types of questions, you can begin that process of applying specific controls in order to secure and manage access to the sensitive data in your enterprise. And as you understand more about where your sensitive data is stored, you'll quickly realize that the identity management paradigm probably doesn't extend over into some of those new areas the same way that it does in your applications and systems. And it's not surprising to see organizations today where that kind of access boundary and identity governance boundary generally apply to the things that are, what I would call the traditional data center applications. But if you're not controlling access to all of the sensitive data throughout your organization that's in your file storage systems, whether those, file storage systems are mainframe or file servers, cloud storage, collaboration portals, it doesn't really matter. You're not doing a good enough job of administering your identity management programs. One of the areas that's making this whole issue even more difficult is cloud adoption. Because if we thought we had some challenges in an on-premises environment, as your organization begins to move applications and data out to the cloud, it really makes it even more difficult to understand, what should be protected, how access is being granted to it. and then, give you the ability to control that full life cycle. And so in many organizations that don't have a full understanding of where data is being stored, the cloud systems can be, a primary area that gets completely overlooked. And that rapid migration, of IT resources to the cloud really adds to the compliance burden, that we're already seeing, many organizations struggle with. And it also, at the same time, raises the bar for securing access. Which brings us to limited breach detection. At the end of the day, when we kind of sit back and we look at what we're trying to accomplish from a regulatory compliance perspective and from a broader security perspective, we really want to make sure that the wrong people never get access to our information, and that we maintain strong identity governance controls and strong access management controls over who has access to the critical assets in our enterprise. And so, since we've already acknowledged that many organizations will be breached, or maybe, we could be as aggressive as saying all organizations will have some type of a breach at some point, the inability to know when a breach has occurred and cure it quickly directly impacts your ability to address your security and compliance requirements. And so the ability to know when someone or something is accessing sensitive data, when they shouldn't be, is not optional any longer. It's now mandatory. And so if you look at, any of the regulations, you'll find that one of the things that you have to be prepared to do is quickly address when a breach has occurred. But if you don't have the right systems in place and you don't have the right processes in place, you can continue to be blind when bad things are happening. And so the key here is really the old adage, knowledge is power. The more you know about your data, the more you know where it's stored, how it's being secured, who has access to it, and how it's being used, the better you can predict when something bad is potentially happening, and then begin to take very proactive steps to mitigate the risk. And then over time, not only mitigate the specific risk, but improve the way that you are aligning your controls to prevent future risks from even happening. And so as we look at this, it really brings us back to the core identity governance framework that many organizations have started down a path on, or have started a journey on, but now need to contemplate a more comprehensive approach to governing access to all of your sensitive data, regardless of where it is stored, whether it's in an application, whether it's in a database, whether it's stored in a file storage system, and whether those systems are on premises or whether those systems are now being either brought up in the cloud or migrating to the cloud. Because only taking a comprehensive approach will really address the compliance mandates, help you simplify your audit requirements, and ultimately make your data more secure against attack. So let's come back to the chart we talked about a few minutes ago. If we think about the heart of the issue here, it's really about encapsulating all of those valuable files where you have either created net new sensitive data or migrated sensitive data from some other place in the enterprise in your overall identity governance strategy. And so whether it's an ERP, whether it's a mainframe, whether it's a web application or a database, that you have strong identity controls around, as soon as the information moves outside of that, you've got to begin extending your access management strategies, your identity governance strategies, to where the information that's actually the largest portion of the overall data in the enterprise is actually residing. And so when we really think about this, the world of data has changed pretty rapidly over the course of the last several years. And so therefore your identity governance strategies, your identity management approaches have to begin changing pretty quickly. And so the right answer is to extend your identity governance processes. And I'll comment here that you need to be very careful not to bring up a separate silo. I think one of the things that we saw even early days of some of the cloud applications coming on board is that there was a tendency to think about maybe securing those and governing access to those independently from the way that an existing identity governance program was in place. And the reality I think that everybody found pretty quickly was by combining all of that together under one common approach to identity governance, you really got the power that you were looking for in terms of visibility and controls that were very consistent. And as you think about extending your identity governance strategy to manage files and file storage systems, I think the same paradigm is very important to consider, in that you don't want to bring up a separate process, where you're certifying access differently, you're requesting access differently. You really want to envelop all of those things in one single program with a common set of tools, a common set of processes, because it will ultimately allow your organization to be much more effective in how you apply those principles. And it'll actually simplify things greatly for your end users. And we all know that at this point in time, the end users are the weakest link in security and in compliance. And so the more that we can do to make it easier on them, the better off your organizations will be when you really think about how you want to incorporate them into the overall security and compliance paradigms that you're trying to drive from a centralized IT perspective. And so by taking a comprehensive approach, what you gain is the ability to synchronize those governance processes across all applications, systems, databases, file storage systems, really everything. And that gains you visibility into access risks across the enterprise. It centralizes how you grant and revoke access throughout a user's life cycle, whether those users are internal to the organization or more and more external to the organization. And it really reduces the complexity of access control. I think when I talk to our customers and our partners and I hear about some of the challenges, one of the realities is the complexity of modern identity governance, because of the number of applications and number of users, really can put a large tax on an organization. And so, the ability to put everything in a single system makes a big difference, because then you don't have to maintain multiple systems. And it gives us the ability, to drive consistency across all of those different processes that you see on the right-hand, side of the slide. And this, gives the power back to the IT organization to facilitate the access that's required by the business. It also allows you to then delegate a lot of the responsibilities to the business, who generally are in the best position to make the risk-based trade-offs day in and day out on who should have access to the critical systems and data in your enterprise. So now let me hand things over to Lewis, and he's going to discuss some very specific ways that SailPoint and our leading identity governance solutions can help you address your compliance and security requirements. Lewis?
Thanks, Paul. As Paul mentioned, it's not enough to simply protect applications and systems. In order to address the compliance and security requirements of today that we all know, and also those coming in the future, it's crucial to extend your identity governance programs to also protect that data that's residing outside of these systems. SailPoint offers a comprehensive identity governance platform that protects access to all applications, systems, and data. Our Identity IQ and Identity Now solutions, which some of you are familiar with, address governance of applications and systems, and Security IQ simply extends the platform to govern sensitive data stored in these files. Security IQ provides four core capabilities to govern sensitive data. The first component provides visibility into data and activities across the organization. So with this type of insight, you can determine what sensitive data you have, where it resides, and who has access to it. And with this visibility into the data, you can establish controls with access policies and even monitoring. You want to ensure that only the right people have access to sensitive data, and you can identify users that are potentially violating some of these access policies. Security IQ also provides a framework to support compliance with corporate and regulatory requirements. You can perform access certifications while also streamlining audit and compliance reporting. The remediation capabilities within Security IQ enable organizations to identify and take action on potential risks with real-time detection and alerts teams, security teams, business owners, and even IT can address risks before it's too late. Security IQ plays a critical role in helping organizations address a variety of compliance initiatives, ranging from your typical internal corporate requirements to meeting specific regulations such as GDPR, HIPAA, PCI, and many others. Security IQ provides a foundation to establish access policies across the organization that can be enforced to ensure that only the right people, again, have access to that right data. Not uncommon for compliance and IT teams, and some of you out there might relate to this, rely on manual processes to respond to audits, which often are very inefficient and inaccurate. By automating some of these access reviews and streamlining the certification process, teams can much more effectively respond to these audits. Many regulations, including GDPR and HIPAA, revolve around the protection and privacy of personal information. Given the volume and proliferation of this type of information, it becomes very difficult for organizations to comprehensively discover and classify this type of PII. Rather than creating policies from the ground up, teams can actually use pre-built policies that are designed for PII, PHI, and GDPR in order to accelerate their compliance readiness. Security IQ also provides an extensive toolkit of reports regarding users, access, data, and activities to provide proof of compliance. In addition to supporting compliance, Security IQ significantly improves the security posture. As users continue through the normal joiner, mover, leaver lifecycle, permission creep can become an issue. By only enabling access to a data source or application from a single group, you can help eliminate some of this permissions creep. With data classification and permissions analysis, you can identify overexposed data and ensure access only to authorized users. By also assigning data owners who know the data best, they can actually better control and determine who should have that right access. With every organization dealing with a variety of cyber threats, it's imperative to be able to identify and respond to them before any damage can be done. Security IQ provides real-time alerting on policy violations so that IT or the data owner can quickly respond and take action before it's too late. Furthermore, as part of an investigation, you can use forensic analysis to trace back and identify the root causes of these violations. We recently released the latest version of Security IQ, which continues to build on addressing these compliance and security initiatives we're talking about today. An enhanced data classification engine provides even greater ability to both discover and classify data at the petabyte scale. It also includes new compliance packs, which provide out-of-the-box policies that, again, are built specifically to support GDPR as well as other PII and PHI-related regulations. With improved access certification management, compliance managers can more effectively manage campaigns and identify risk exposure. Perhaps the most notable is the new admin dashboard with embedded analytics for even greater visibility across government data. As we see here with the new graphical interface, you can get a real-time snapshot of what's going on. It's basically a single pane of glass where you can get information about things like overexposed data, active campaigns, alerts, and even data ownership. These various widgets and reports that you see here can also be customized to focus on specific activities or data sources that you're most concerned with. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that the compliance and security teams have the insight they need in order to make the right decisions and take action. As we get closer to the introduction of GDPR in May 2018, it will be very important to be prepared, but it's also important to understand how compliance in general can benefit an organization. With the right processes and technology in place to support compliance, you can further empower your company in a number of ways. You can ensure that data is properly secured throughout its life cycle. With automated compliance processes in place, you do away with a lot of the manual processes that reduce productivity of IT and the business. By taking account of all your data assets, you gain visibility and understanding of where your data is, what's in it, and who's accessing it. With compliance policies in place, you significantly reduce the risk associated with malicious behavior, data breaches, and cyber threats. And finally, with a complete compliance framework, you can be prepared to quickly respond and take action on any compliance or security events. Now, as we review the key GDPR articles affiliated with data, we can see how these compliance benefits nicely tie into addressing these articles. So here in Article 5, it states how organizations need to process, store, and manage their personal information. Here we want to minimize the collection and retention of this personal data. With Article 25, we're focused here on fine-grained access control. We need to be able to ensure that only the right people have access to this personal data. Articles 32 and 35, again, focus on securing personal data. We want to make sure the appropriate technical and organizational measures are implemented to secure this personal data. Here for Articles 19, 33, and 34 are focused on monitoring and detection. We must be able to detect, quantify, and report on events, including data breaches. And lastly, we need to be able to provide compliance documentation, right, around who's accessing this personal data, what data processing activities are going on, etc. So let's take a look at how Security IQ specifically addresses these articles. So here under Article 5, Security IQ is going to allow you to discover where personal data is stored and what it contains, who are the users that are accessing this information, and you're able to monitor and be alerted as to what's happening to this type of information. Here under Articles 25 and 32, we're able to centralize visibility, again, with some of these dashboards that we've seen across these various data sources and where this personal data is being processed. And we're also able to assign those data owners that are responsible for the data. And again, these data owners who have the greatest knowledge and intelligence about what this data is. And then at the end here, being able to provide extensive reporting to be able to prove GDPR compliance. And here's what the data classification dashboard of GDPR looks like. Here we have various data classification rules set up to find personal data for all 28 EU countries. So we have things like phone numbers, bank codes, ID numbers, terms, zip codes, license plates, etc. And here we have a data analysis report. We're able to get a very granular insight into the type of sensitive data that's been classified, what application it's in, and who's that data owner. And within this dashboard, we can get a detailed insight to know who has access to what data, what types of activities are happening to this data, what resources are overexposed. Again, the end goal here is ensuring that only the right people have access to this personal data. To address Articles 19, 33, and 34, Security IQ allows you to monitor who's accessing this personal information and what actions they're performing. We're able to get notified and alerted in real time as to any violations or anomalies that are occurring, and we're able to automate some of these remediation tasks. For Articles 30 and 35, we're able to identify personal data stored in various repositories and file servers on premises and also in the cloud. We're able to flag processes and data stores with high-risk data, and again, we're able to provide that extensive GDPR reporting. So here's an example of how Security IQ can monitor and detect some of these access violations. We have an HR folder here with tons of personal information. We want to make sure that only the HR department can access this sensitive data. What we can do is set up an alert that if anyone outside the HR department tries to access any classified PII, then the data owner will be notified. So if we walk through the process here, if Sharon Fisher, for instance, now comes in and copies a file classified as sensitive, the event will trigger an alert to the data owner. And from here, they can initiate any number of actions, including removing access, which will automatically be fulfilled and stop Sharon from any further activity in this folder. Article 30 outlines that an audit trail of all activities and personal data must be stored and be comprehensive enough for forensic analysis should a data breach occur. Here we have a report that provides an audit trail of user access, the type of access, and what kind of sensitive data they have access to. There are a variety of other reports also available to help satisfy this requirement. As we conclude the session today, we must keep in mind that in order to fully address your compliance and security initiatives, it must hinge on being able to deliver complete visibility and control across your applications, systems, and also your data. When we forget about the data, this is when we start to get blindsided by the risks they pose. As a recognized leader in identity governance, SailPoint has built an identity governance platform that extends the typical IG program and provides a comprehensive approach to govern all applications and data, whether on premises or in the cloud. And rather than employing a variety of point products, we deliver a single solution governing access that spans across all identity activities in the business. Our ultimate goal is to empower the business to achieve its goals while securely ensuring that the right people have the right access to the right information. So we'll go ahead and conclude the session here, and I'll turn it back over to Shay, and we'll see if we can answer some of the questions that have come in today.
Thanks, Louis. This is just a friendly reminder that if you have a question, submit that into the Q&A panel, and we'll address as many as we can in the allotted time. So we'll go ahead and jump in with our first question. Here it is. Our organization will be moving some of our data storage to the cloud. How does this impact our ability to govern access to data?
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, we see that more and more from a cloud perspective. And I think it goes back to what I was saying kind of at the beginning of the discussion today, where the ability to encapsulate any access to sensitive data that's being stored in the cloud is a key part of the approach that you want to take. Extending your identity controls so that you are granting and revoking access as a user moves through their life cycle, to cloud-based applications and files is just as important, and maybe in some cases even more important than it is for your on-prem resources.
Great. Okay, next question. What would you recommend as the first step to begin to prepare for GDPR?
I think the first step here, it starts with discovering what data you have. In order to do anything, to make any decisions, you have to know what personal data you possibly have. So going through a discovery and classification process, using some of these policies to go out and identify that GDPR-related data is going to be your first step. Once you know what you have, what needs to be protected, now you can start making some of those decisions on how you're going to protect the data, how you're going to secure it, who should have access to it, and setting up some of those access controls.
We have a DLP solution to prevent data loss outside our organization. Is it necessary to also have a solution to manage data access?
Now that's a surprisingly common question these days. And I think it all comes back to organizations taking a little bit of a layered approach to, securing the sensitive data that they're trying to protect. So, data leakage solutions, from a DLP perspective, are an important part of a layered security approach because they're generally going to attack the problem from a data in motion perspective. And so you're going to be able to set up policies that restrict the ability for somebody to move data, onto a USB drive or attach it to an email and send it outside of the organization. But I think it doesn't necessarily address the same identity governance requirements that I think are required from a data at rest perspective, where you really have to make sure that even people inside of the organization only have access to the sensitive data, if you will, that's required as part of their business role, or technical role within the enterprise. And so we see, a lot of organizations that maybe have a mature DLP, system in place and process in place, actually take the data classification rules that may be defined in that system and import them into something like Security IQ so that they can leverage, that the same, fundamental policies across, both the data at rest and data in motion. We also see some organizations that, may have very coarse-grained policies on the DLP side, implementing much more fine-grained policies when they really go to implement an identity governance system, on their file shares, their SharePoint servers, and things like that. So again, I think the reality is that DLP and identity governance are very complementary, and we see a lot of use cases where the integration of the two, or the two working side by side, really improve the overall security in a meaningful way.
Great, thank you. Okay, next question. PII and personal data in GDPR have different definitions. How can SailPoint identify personal data? The slide said only PII.
Yeah, so I guess the short answer to that is the policy engine and the rules that get defined as part of SailPoint Security IQ are very flexible. And so in the latest release that Lewis was talking about in 5.1, we expanded that policy engine and the policy framework significantly. And then we delivered out-of-the-box compliance packs for kind of standard PII and probably maybe a little bit more of a U.S.-centric view of PII. Then we delivered a separate GDPR pack that kind of takes, personally identifiable information and puts that EU spin on it, so that, you're looking for the things that are actually required to be protected specifically under GDPR. And then we also have a PHI that's more looking for healthcare-related information. And in the future, in the next release of Security IQ, we'll actually have a new HIPAA policy that will combine the out-of-the-box PII and the out-of-the-box PHI, so that you're actually looking across data that contains both sets of policy rules at the same time.
Got it. Okay, so how does Security IQ interface or relate to Identity IQ? We have someone on the call that's implementing Identity IQ to manage Active Directory groups, but they're wondering if it sounds like Security IQ does that in a better way.
Yeah, I'll answer the first question, which is how does it relate to Identity IQ, and then I'll come back to the specific AD question in a second. From a Security IQ and Identity IQ perspective, they're really designed so that they can operate in a collaborative manner to help you address the identity governance use cases comprehensively. So we're generally going to see Identity IQ focused on your structured applications, databases, platform systems, and we're going to be driving the normal use cases of access requests, provisioning, access certifications, SOD policy administration, etc. Security IQ then expands that footprint in the enterprise so that you can directly attack the needs of identity governance for your unstructured data resources that are generally stored in files and on-file storage systems. It's then going to layer in some additional capabilities, especially around the sensitive data discovery, data classification, data ownership analysis, because that's kind of a specialized problem that doesn't really exist when you're talking about applications and databases like it does when you're talking about files. And so we're going to generally see both of those solutions used when you're taking a comprehensive approach. And then we have data level integration today, and long term, we will have kind of process and UI level integration, so that from a day-to-day, end user perspective, they're going to one kind of dashboard point of view to see everything that they need to do. Your administrators, are getting kind of a rolled up view of what's happening from an identity and identity governance and access management perspective, across all your systems, all your data repositories, no matter, whether it's Identity IQ or Security IQ that's, kind of underpinning the fundamental features and capabilities, behind the scenes. So that's kind of a good segue into that Active Directory question. I think the reality is, when we look at what, Identity IQ is good at, it's good at understanding what Active Directory groups exist and what the membership structure of those groups looks like. And so it's a very common use case to have, Identity IQ in charge of granting and revoking access, to an AD group as part of a, onboarding process, offboarding process, ad hoc access requests, etc. Security IQ then extends the capabilities that SailPoint has for AD by actually going in and doing a very deep analysis of the effective permissioning models, determining whether you have nested groups that are unintentionally granting more access than you intend to particular information secured by AD, and then also gives you the view of the data underneath. And so, then I can integrate some of that information back into Identity IQ. So if I'm granting and revoking access directly through Identity IQ, as part of that process, I can give, a manager or an IT owner visibility that AD group actually provides access to these specific file shares, that only people in finance should have access to. And that way, I do a better job of governing access to my critical resources. Security IQ can also be used to help normalize your AD structures. Once you've determined that you've got, some effective access models that maybe are broken, or you need to, reduce the amount of nesting that's in place, Security IQ has a special set of tools that will actually go through and help you, drive a cleanup process on Active Directory that tends to be very valuable, when you're trying to simplify how access is being granted, through something that can over time grow very complex like Active Directory.
Got it. Okay. Next question. How does discovery work? Domain admin rights and scan all files on servers for sensitive data signatures?
Yeah, the sensitive data discovery process is pretty straightforward. I mean, you're going to provide Security IQ access to the target system. The specific rights, I'm not sure. I'm more than happy to follow up with that question offline. But effectively what you're going to do is you're going to go through a process of leveraging the rules you defined for what equals sensitive, and we're going to go through and tag the files where we find a pattern match. And so whether it's something like a credit card number, a social security number, or an address, we're basically going to turn on those rules in the policy framework. And then each time, we scan through a file share or SharePoint server, a cloud repository like Box, we're going to identify files which contain that kind of information that then gives you visibility to the specific, AD groups that might be controlling access, direct rights that are controlling access, and then ultimately the people who have access to that sensitive data.
Okay, great. So does Security IQ monitor things like strong authentication?
Not directly. Security IQ is going to monitor, whether somebody has accessed a particular, file type or sensitive data location, but it's not going to specifically look at strong authentication in that process. It's just going to look whether a particular user has accessed something or whether data itself has been accessed by any user.
Okay. All right, next question. What means are you using to identify and scope data, especially in a global organization with multiple departments and systems processing similar data across the globe?
Yeah, that policy framework, again, is going to come into play here, where you have an ability to, define rules that will help you create isolation. And so maybe I'm only looking for certain types of PII on servers that are resident, in a particular part of the world. That's just part of constructing, the policy and the scan model so that, you're not artificially alerting on things that are business as usual. You're only looking for things that are, fundamentally anomalies.
Great, thank you. Okay, that is about all the time that we have today for questions. Let you know that we will be sending you a recording of today's webinar tomorrow, so keep an eye out for an email from us tomorrow with that. We will also include a complimentary solution brief in that email titled 3 Reasons Why You May Be the Next Data Breach Target. And if you'd like to learn more, go ahead and contact us using the phone number or email on your screen, and we can connect you with an identity expert and answer any additional questions that you have. Paul, Lewis, thank you for your time today. Thank you for everyone who joined us, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.